why you've done it and why you think it's relevant in terms of what's going on right now.
Because first of all, war is very harmful. Um, and, people's lives get ruined for absolutely no good reason. You're trying to raise, your family, you're trying to live your life. And then all of a sudden you find that you are an outgroup, you are an enemy. And, when I started looking at this, I was only in university. I was like 17, 18. I was a psychology student. And I noticed that PR firms were managing wars. And I thought, well, how does this get through? And how do people believe it? So, because I was a psychology student and I was studying this, I realized all the answers were in my psychology class. It's just it wasn't applied to journalism. So I said, why don't I become a journalist in order to see how this happens? So I conducted studies as a journalist, and then I saw that propaganda is not like other forms of communication. Propaganda actually works on your brain as much as it works on your mind. I always use the example. Have you ever had somebody insult you and you knew that they were jealous or you knew that they just were ignorant, but it still bothered you, that your brain processes this to be upset, but your mind knows better? Well, propaganda just hits your brain first so that you are biologically constricted into seeing the obvious ruses and lies.
So how would this even work beyond the importance of a focus on it?
Well, it starts with the fact that we focus way too much on, let's say, analytical literacy, which is basically analytically, we can only make two judgments if two things are the same or different, or if one thing is bigger or more than another. So that means that if we focus strictly on analytical thinking, we get very competitive, and then we get on this hamster wheel where we have to outdo the other person because we're either 1 or 0. So analytical thinking kind of puts you on that hamster wheel where you don't see things. We also have emotional literacy, which we're not exactly taught in schools. The closest we have is psychology. And that sort of gives you a feel for things, positive or negative. And you can trust your own emotions when you understand them. Because people go, well, he's not rational, he's too emotional. Well, emotional doesn't mean irrational, but the lack of emotions is the sign of being a psychopath. So we have not looked into the emotional aspect of propaganda or the primal. We are also sometimes primally illiterate, not realizing that we can stand on our own 2 feet. And when we're given a sink or swim, which is what propaganda hinges on, a confirmation bias where we're not given information that refutes a hypothesis, and a sink or swim where we either do this my way or no way, the no choice, we tend to then think, oh, we have no other option but to go with what the propagandist decrees. When we get scared, we don't think. When we are taught how to use our emotions and how to use our survival instincts, our evolutionary drives, propaganda becomes less effective, because propaganda, the whole narrative is you're helpless. You're going to die unless you do exactly what we tell you to do. When we say, no, that's okay, you go your way, I go mine, and you can stick with it, propaganda doesn't work. When you are not afraid, propaganda becomes less effective. If you are not, you're not prone to 1 and 0 bigotry, it's less effective. Well, us versus them. No, it's us versus us. Why would you look down on another group of people for whatever reason? Why are you afraid of them? Why don't you, if there's something people are upset, usually they have a very good reason to be upset. That's where emotional literacy comes in. We don't go, well, he's being upset, I don't understand why this group of people are being upset. Well, why don't you go up and ask? Maybe, we have no problem if we step on someone's foot and the person says, I hurt. You go, okay, I'm sorry, I removed my foot. But when it's emotional, people go, well, this person's being irrational, this person's being selfish. We don't understand the realm of emotions and how they impact war propaganda. So I guess the short answer is we need to look at different kinds of literacies in order to combat propaganda.
I just want to add very quickly that from your book, you say you define war propaganda as the deliberate, choreographed, and strategic, deep psychological manipulation of individuals and groups in order to gain mass compliance and uniformity of thought, to rig beliefs in order for a targeted in-group to draw the conclusion that prejudice against an out-group is necessary and the proper action to involve violence and war. Oliver, can you add or respond in addition to that question again of why a focus on propaganda and how, and maybe a little bit of how it in fact works?
Right. Yeah, well, again, picking up from that was a great definition, by the way, of propaganda. Thank you, Alexandra. So I want to pick up on propaganda. Yeah, it works simultaneously both on our brains and also on our emotions, very strongly, very insistently. When it works on our brains, it's basically telling us this is what you need to pay attention to, and therefore it's saying, well, don't pay attention to that over there because that'll confuse you. Just pay attention to what I'm telling you. It may be true what I'm telling you, and that's all you need to know, that it may be true. But of course, the thing that is not being said might very well influence my judgment as to how significant this truth that is being pushed into my face actually is. So that's how it works. That's how it's working. Sometimes we use the word framing when we're talking about how the media play a part in propaganda. They frame events in one particular way that grabs it, monopolizes our attention, and we can't think of anything else while we're focusing on this particular frame that the media are impressing on us. Now, the other very, very important aspect of this, of course, is how propaganda plays on our emotions.
Well, during the first Gulf War, there was, the government, the U.S. government wanted to intervene, and they were doing quite a few stories. None of them took. And then came the babies in the incubator's Hope, where there was a 15-year-old girl, Naira, who was testifying in front of Congress and saying, well, she was a volunteer there, and the Iraqi soldiers came and they stormed the hospital. They left the adults unharmed, but they somehow needed those baby incubators. So they took the babies out of the incubators, not telling us how did they take the babies out of the incubators. They put them on the floor. Well, couldn't anybody pick them up? No. Did they throw them? Well, if they did, she would have counted it. So that was the excuse. Well, they were slapping babies, So we all had people got outraged, and then I believe it was John MacArthur from Harper's Magazine kind of was suspicious, and then he found out, well, Hill and Knowlton was the PR firm behind it, and nothing was true. And I just wanted to make one more point. Propaganda is easily embedded in journalism. There's a concept called newspeg. So if one media outlet reports something on a certain way in a certain framing, everybody else will. So it's follow the leader is actually ingrained in the scaffolding of journalism.